Well, thank you all. I knew if I waited long enough, I'd get a few questions. Not too many that I couldn't handle. We'll have to come back to the NEST question a little bit later. But at this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to the NEST panel. And Rachael, Fleurence, I believe you are up to moderate that panel. And Rachael is recently hired back in last April, Executive Director for the NEST Coordinating Center. We're really pleased to have Rachael here and leading this effort. And she comes with tremendous experience from her background standing up PCORnet within PCORI. And with that, I'd like to welcome Rachael to the podium.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here for my second annual public forum, but my first in the capacity of the Executive Director of NEST. So I am going to be joined by an illustrious panel. So Adrian, Hernandez, Jeff, and Michelle are going to join me, and I'll introduce you as we sit down. Great, so thanks for joining me. So Jeff, you've been on all of the panels to date, so I probably don't need to
This is it.
I probably don't need to introduce you fully, but since we do have people on the WebEx, Director Shuren, who heads up CDRH at FDA, and as many of you know, has played a visionary role in leading the implementation of NEST. Michelle McMurry-Heath. Michelle is the Global Head of Evidence Generation for the medical device companies at J&J. Michelle was also, prior to this, working with Jeff at the FDA and has also been part of the leadership and vision around using real-world evidence and envisaging what this entity called NEST could do for the ecosystem. So, Michelle, thank you for joining us. Adrian Hernandez. Adrian is the Vice Dean for Clinical Research at the Duke University School of Medicine. Adrian's also a professor of cardiology at Duke. And what I'd like to say is that all three of our panelists sit on the newly appointed NEST governing committee as well. So in that sense, they're wearing many hats today, but in particular, I thought it would be really interesting to have that multi-stakeholder perspective from people that are also sitting on this newly appointed governing committee for NEST. So before I start peppering you with very difficult questions, I thought I'd just say a few words for the audience about where we're at with NEST organizationally and just provide you with a status update since I joined. So the vision for NEST is not new. The vision for NEST started several years ago with many efforts undertaken under Jeff and Michelle's leadership. There was a Brookings planning board that sort of sat and thought through the different issues and thought about what NEST could be. There's been a number of efforts on the FDA side that we heard about this morning in terms of using real-world data and real-world evidence to make actual decisions. So that work is already well underway, sort of independently and in parallel from NEST launching as an organization. In 2016, Bill mentioned this on the in his prior talk. In 2016, the FDA awarded a grant to MDIC to launch this new organization and entity called NEST. I joined in April 2017, and so again, I cannot take credit for all the great work that's been going on sort of before that, both in terms of vision and in terms of the efforts going on at the FDA. And I was sort of handed the difficult task of turning the vision into something concrete. So what is NEST? What kind of services is it going to provide? What happens when you knock on NEST's front door? So I'm sort of in that difficult gray zone of transforming the sort of the wonderful vision to serve the ecosystem into something very concrete. And as Jeff likes to remind me periodically, within a 2-year time frame.
It's not overnight.
Well, indeed. So I thought maybe I would just let you know about 4 practical steps that I've undertaken with a lot of help since April. So the first one is that we now have a functional governing committee in place. It met for the first time in person on July 18th. It's going to meet again actually next week. The governing committee is a multi-stakeholder group that has really representation from a number of the key stakeholders within the environment. So, and on this panel, Jeff represents the FDA, Michelle represents industry in general, and AdvaMed in particular within that ecosystem, and she's been doing a great job of fielding questions from the industry at large and sort of helping the governing committee understand what the specific needs are there. Adrian represents the clinical research world, but we're also lucky that Adrian has a foot in the operations and the health systems side at Duke, and is really sort of helping sell the value proposition for clinical research organizations to be part of an effort such as NEST. So the governing committee is up and running, it's functional, it has a charter. I always like to say that with governance, if it's going well, no one notices, but when it's not going well, it's really a barrier to everything moving along. So we're fortunate that this has been a pretty smooth transition into governance for NEST. The second strategy that I've been working on is in identifying data partners to work with NEST. That's going to be really sort of the meat of NEST's work, working with a number of places that have data. So that includes health system providers, delivery systems, it includes registries, it includes health payers. So we're in the early stages of setting up memorandums of understanding with these groups and really starting to explore data capabilities and then governance around what it means to partner with industry to do the kinds of studies that are needed for NEST. The third work stream that we've been active on is on designating the first demonstration projects. These were announced yesterday. One project is the development of an EHR-based network. It's a collaboration between Medtronic and Mercy. And then the second 2 projects are using mobile health applications to aggregate multiple sources of data with patient consent to potentially augment post-market surveillance. So these are just sort of the beginning of what NEST will do in terms of working with projects. We certainly know that there are gaps in the kinds of demonstration projects that we'd like to be supporting, including working with the imaging and diagnostic groups, working with the 510K companies, working with smaller companies. So there's a number of gaps that we've been able to identify. But again, I think the Rome was not built in one day, I think was mentioned this morning, and that's a phrase that we've been using as well. And then the final thing I'll say about sort of the status of NEST is sort of, I think one of the biggest challenges is transforming just NEST from a vision of using real-world data and real-world evidence to really making NEST into an organization with a mission, with a staff, with products and services that are going to be offered and that are going to eventually be sustainable. So I think that's sort of the really a key part of the strategic work. We will report back to you next year on the progress that we'll have made by then. I have engaged with a group to help us start developing our business plan. So I think that work is well underway and is certainly critical to the viability of NEST moving forward. So with that, I'd like to turn to my panelists and sort of ask them a few questions. Mike Minogue this morning stole a few of my questions, but that's okay. We will make new answers or similar answers, and we'll do a sort of a reliability test afterwards to see if we got the same answers or not. So what I'd like to start off with is just sort of thinking about NEST from your perspective as a stakeholder, and I'll start with you, Jeff, although you have already answered this question. But from your perspective, what is the potential and the promise that the NEST Coordinating Center holds for the FDA and CDRH in particular?
Well, it's part of the promise of real-world data, I'll say ultimately real-world evidence. So challenges that we see is that our reliance on clinical evidence generation through traditional clinical trials often has led to information that is not as truly informative about the real benefit risk profile of the technology. Oftentimes you can't understand that until you're using that in routine clinical practice. Secondly, the high costs and the long time involved are barriers for important technologies to come to market. And then in addition, as we have tried to sort of set the needle in the right place for when we need particular data for a product to come to market versus after it goes to market, and with truly important technologies, we can accept more uncertainty, benefits and risks. That means some data shifts from pre-market to post-market. The reliance on a traditional clinical trial is problematic because patients really lack an incentive to sign up for the clinical trial once it's out there on the market, and that limits our ability to truly have in place the right regulatory framework and pathways for technology. So much about NEST is solving the challenges we face today with real-world data and real-world evidence, because it is, issues with insufficient poor quality, incomplete, different systems measuring different things. And you kind of heard about this fragmented and siloed information. Well, we not only have that, we have sort of fragmented and siloed marketplace because there's a lot of individual purchasers. So NEST's attempt to solve that is to bring together the various communities within our ecosystem in much more of a collective purchasing approach, that you are now created, rather than a fragmented marketplace, a much broader marketplace that can help drive towards more standardization, improvements in quality, and ultimately drive down the time and cost and increase the value and use of real-world evidence. And what does it mean for those who participate? Better information for patients, for clinicians, healthcare systems, payers, for making the kinds of decisions that they make. For industry, the opportunity for getting product to market in less time and lower cost, and the same applying for meeting post-market considerations. And I think the opportunity for shifting more appropriately some of the pre-market data to post-market. And patients as an added benefit here, the other challenge we face is on identifying safety problems. Too often we rely on adverse event reports, which means that many more patients get exposed before we identify the problem. That also means that by the time we do, we may not be able to salvage the technology. So part of this is, can we move from our traditional passive surveillance system to complement that with a more active surveillance system? So NEST is both the promise regarding what we understand about technologies, what they truly do, and I also think the safety net, the right kind of safety net we need in this country so we completely shift the regulatory framework we have in place today, and patients have the better protections that they deserve.
Thank you. Michelle?
Well, if you think about it, I think the true hope of NEST is the ability to fully unlock the potential of technology to improve health. So there's this inherent contradiction between how we usually depend on technology to evolve and improve, and that's constant iteration. You meet a need, and then you learn from meeting that need, and then you engineer an even better solution down the line. But when you have a heavily regulated space, it interrupts that virtuous cycle, and it interrupts it for good reason, and it provides really important safeguards. But the more we can return to that natural technological innovation cycle, the more hope we have of really learning from the solutions we have for patients, solving patient needs, and then improving to ultimately better solutions down the line. So real-world evidence and real-world data will hopefully allow our regulators who play such an important role to gain earlier confidence in innovation, to be able to monitor how those innovations behave in the marketplace, and at the same time allow innovators to see with really great granularity how their innovations either fail or succeed, and learn from that and improve them.
Good. So from the perspective of a health system like Duke, and say a research community like Duke, we really have one common goal, and that's to advance health. And so when you think about that, we're actually being required from patients to actually choose us because supposedly we can do something better, but we need the real data, or actually evidence, to show that we can do that. We also are being required by others, clinicians, payers, to show that we're actually using medical technology wisely, that we're actually delivering results that matter to patients and actually deliver the outcomes that clinicians consider. And so in that regard, there's actually really a unity of purpose that we need to have better common data systems that actually are learning as patients are going through the healthcare system every day in terms of what's happening, but also what's happening outside of just the healthcare system environment. So when you think of the majority of health outcomes, they're actually happening outside of the health system, and we don't necessarily have a vision of that. We don't necessarily have insights to that. So when you think of NEST and how its purpose is really to catalyze and accelerate research and development that would improve decision making, it seems to me that that's going to be a great venue for identifying the best solutions, identifying best approaches for data and methods, and then also providing some set of standards that we all will be able to act on in terms of what are our decisions. And so as an example of that commitment, when NEST came through with the MOU of how to partner with us, it was one of the fastest things that I saw Duke agree to. And sometimes large academic medical centers get a slight rap on being slow. And in this case, it literally happened within 48 hours because of the excitement here.
So I'll start with you again, Adrian. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing NEST to be successful within the next 2 years?
Sure. So I think the excitement for NEST about solving everything for everyone is probably one of the biggest challenges, because you can see that the enthusiasm and the speed of ideas and creativity and innovation is everywhere. And so how do we actually make sure to help provide some focus and allow the best ideas to quickly bubble up and scale them quickly for the ecosystem? So that's kind of one thing. It's just almost an embarrassment of riches with so many different interested parties. The second thing, which I think for the success of NEST, is actually how to develop that coalition of willing partners. So patient groups, health systems, organizations, health plans, those that have data that will actually enrich and speed and accelerate the R&D process and provide the results that people can make decisions from, so the real world data and turn that into evidence. And so that is going to be a pay it forward model, and so having that coalition of willing will be important.
Thank you. Michelle, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing NEST?
Well, I'll agree with Adrian that it rests in the expectations bucket. And there's a lot that you can do in 2 years, but not everything that we envision as possible can be done in that 2-year window. So I think the number one job for NEST in this upcoming 12 to 18 months is to build a sustainable level of enthusiasm among the folks that really are going to have to roll up their sleeves and contribute their resources, their time, and their passion to really seeing this through. And that's going to involve being able to articulate a vision that is both aspirational and tangible, so that folks can see themselves in it, see the answers for themselves and their companies and their patients and their constituencies, and at the same time think of it as really advancing health. So that is the delicate balance that needs to be struck, and I think it's important, and as I know, Rachael, you think about often, is this is not the first attempt to build these sorts of networks, and I think you've done an amazing job of trying to make sure that you've looked at lessons learned from some of the attempts of the past. But despite those attempts, we are moving closer to learning more about the health of our patients in different settings. We do have access today to more real-world data than we did 5 or 10 years ago. So we can look at some of those formal efforts and say maybe they didn't go all the way, maybe they didn't accomplish what they set out to do, but they did advance the ball, and we need to be very clear about how we're going to further that dialogue and further that field.
I love going at the end because then there isn't so much to say, because you already heard it. You know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah, exactly.
The building blocks are already there. It's now sort of building upon the great work that has already come before. And buy-in is absolutely critical. This is like the battle between good and evil. So, you know, the greatest accomplishment of the devil was to convince people he didn't exist. And so our greatest accomplishment here is to have people believe that the values of real-world evidence exist.
I just want to underscore the concept that the enemy of the good is perfection. So, because when you hear stories from patients, they want answers now. They want results. And so, if we're always thinking about what's perfect, you know, perfect's an ultimate goal, but that doesn't necessarily always get results that will matter, that can matter today. So I think that's really important.
So Adrian, you and I worked together for a number of years on launching PCORNet, sort of a largely academic medical center-based research network to do both observational studies and pragmatic embedded clinical trials. What would you say are the biggest lessons for NEST from that experience that we had working in that area?
Yeah, so you know, I think a few things is, you know, always being very clear with a variety of partners. You know what's going to be needed, and then what's going to be the value proposition that they will be able to share with their constituents. And so, just to give an example, so at Duke, say if it's me and the CAO and the CMO say this is important, that will happen because you have information technology, someone who's overseeing the clinical medical enterprise, and someone's overseeing research. You know, those three saying this matters is important, and so it no longer becomes a research project. It's not a grant. It's actually something that's actually trying to do something that has a near-term deliverable that's directly affecting the population or the groups of people that they care for. And so one of the things I think in terms of kind of lessons learned is being clear on the direction and the pathway, which it looks like that's happening now. And then also what's going to be the return or the value for that contribution for the various stakeholders.
We sort of, as a governing committee, we've started looking at sort of what we're calling use cases for NEST. So what are sort of examples of projects or areas that NEST really needs to kind of help support or help prioritize or help advertise to various communities. So if I were to ask all of you sort of what are the top 2 use cases for NEST to really sort of wrestle with in this first year, what would be your answer? And I won't hold you to it, but just sort of maybe trying to be more specific for our audience about what are the kinds of problems that we're really kind of wrestling with day in, day out as NEST launches. And I'll let you volunteer for who wants to start on that one.
I'll start just because it came up in a recent scenario. And so say in the field of orthopedics, there's very big interest in terms of understanding what's the right choices for a knee replacement, and how do we know that's the right choice over a longer term. And so if we have the business case essentially that we were able to track and follow a device that patients, clinicians, the health system can make a set of good choices in terms of the many choices that they have, that actually builds into providing the answers that patients, clinicians, health systems, payers, those who are developing the devices will find valuable. And to kind of illustrate that, which has been a known challenge, and I think there's much more motivation to do that, is how do we incorporate UDI? And for most large health systems, the health IT dollars are 20 to 1 to so-called research dollars. And so like having that use case of how it's going to help us collectively advance health will be important.
I'm going to be very, very specific because I hear it a lot from the AdvaMed member companies. I hear it internally within my own company. Being able to show that you can bring a Class 2 device to market sooner because of tools that Nest has enabled is going to be essential to being able to really get that tangible vision. And then showing that that acceleration can be leveraged globally. So it's those two pieces that are really going to make most companies decide whether or not this is something they will support for the long haul or something that is a nice to have. And in this day and age, nice to have are ending up on the cutting room floor more and more. So I think that's going to be critical.
And I'll add on the one other piece to that one would also be the support for coverage and reimbursement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
Let's see, I blanked on my next difficult question for you. What is your, sort of as you imagine Nest in 2 years at our critical deadline in 2019, what is your sense of what Nest looks like as an organization or as an entity? What is it offering the ecosystem that's not currently there? I mean, there are a lot of players right now in the ecosystem with good data, the registries that are out there sort of doing sort of a lot of great work with real world data. So what is this added value that Nest brings, and what does it sort of look like as an organization in 2 years as we sit here again in front of this audience sort of sharing the progress that Nest has made?
Well, I'll jump in on that one because I think it goes to why MDIC was such a great partner for the Nest Coordinating Center, because MDIC is this unique organization which has a scientific approach to answering problems that have stymied patients, industry, and regulators and payers, and bringing them all together and saying, this isn't about lobbying, this isn't about your bottom line, this is about finding solutions really in a safe space. And so that is what sets this Nest opportunity apart from many other opportunities, because that is where it's situated. And it was situated as part of MDIC for that reason. So that gives you a prominence, and that gives your solutions a heightened visibility that is going to be very, very powerful. And it's going to reassure the various stakeholders that what you do conclude, what you do find, will be readily adopted. And that is very, very important, I think, to having that faith that it's going to take to make things happen.
Let me also add that, like, if you start thinking about in 2 years, that if Nest really is that organization that people are bringing to their best ideas for solutions for accelerating R&D and innovation, and establishing what's that pathway, what are the methods, what's the framework for getting that more readily adopted, that will definitely be a success. And so in a lot of ways, all the different components are coming together for that to evaluate, test, scale, and implement. And so that would be a great success for Nest.
And scalability, right now, all these efforts, the individual registries are coordinated, registry networks. They all have their own little rules of the road and different costs that are involved, and we have to now start to standardize a lot of that sort of across the marketplace. You also mentioned that you were asking questions you'd asked, or others Mike had asked before, and I had to change maybe my answer. So I meant to say that we have to have the prototype for Nest up in 1 year, not 2 years.
Excellent. So we hear a lot about the promise of mobile health and sort of mobile health technologies and sort of patient-generated data. Nest on Monday just announced the designation of 2 demonstration projects in that space where we're going to be, or where the projects will be looking at at comparing or sort of validating industry-owned registry data compared to this data that was going to be aggregated at the patient level. So it seems to me that these are emerging fields, but we're probably not too far in the future where these really are going to be promising avenues for doing studies such as an augmenting post-market surveillance and really sort of overhauling the current system. But from where you sit, how close do you think we are from really being in a full-blown system that really is able to capitalize and leverage sort of the patient-led and patient-generated data? So, Adrian.
I'm very bullish on that, and so I'll just so one is the penetration of mobile health technology, other wearables, is quite large, and so people are using that in a lot of different ways, and it's also relatively has a large potential to measure things that people care about every day, so such as what someone's activity is, or sleep patterns, things that really have a large effect on someone's life or indicator of their quality of life. And as an example, I came back from a trip a couple weeks ago, and my father, who's 79, was wearing a new fancy wearable watch as part of a study to actually understand his health. And he was so excited about that in terms of what that would help contribute and tell the research program what his health was like and how that may help in terms of his arthritis issues. That would be data that would be contributed to help speed the R&D of that area. And so you start seeing that and seeing what's a possibility, and then also eventually closing the loop in terms of then, how do you feed back to people that they have certain transitions in health that they may have different pathways that they may consider to improve their health. So it's quite exciting. And the other thing is, when you think about all the health outcomes that happen outside a hospital, that can really offer a huge opportunity. So the two demos are really exciting for that reason.
I think one of the big unanswered questions in this space is how will these new technologies completely revolutionize how we think about patient privacy and consenting patients for studies? Because all of our rules around those two areas were devised with this assumption that data was something patients were going to reluctantly give and not really want to see, and at the same time be used kind of in a very protective way by healthcare providers. But that is a completely different point of view from how your father uses his watch, how my mom uses her Fitbit. This is data that patients want. They're readily giving it up. They're readily trying to learn more about their health, and they have a hunger for this kind of knowledge and information. And we need to modernize our rules around privacy and consent in those same ways. And that's veering into the policy space, but I think the work that NEST is going to do can go hand in hand to try to inform how to best make those changes.
And even the concept that so-called data is static, this whole thing that there's one database and it's not a continuous information from a variety of sources is going to be quite different. So.
And the question of what does the data mean as well. There was the recent, I don't want to tout a competitor's product, but I just saw the recent clearance of the pacemaker that can basically give feedback on when a patient is about to decline or have a catastrophic heart failure event. But we don't quite know yet whether or not that data is as accurate as we would hope in predicting those events. So being able to actually tease apart what that data is going to evolve into in terms of a health outcome is still yet to be determined.
And the mobile technology is giving us a chance to truly study that as people go about their day-to-day lives. And you raise a very good point about the information. I mean, I sort of view that since my personal information is now owned by a variety of nation states and criminal organizations, I might as well give it up to the healthcare system to figure out something constructive. So I found that rather, freeing. Removed a burden from me. But I also think, the question of is that here, is it in the future? It goes back to even our whole model on Nest, which is, others have said, this is you're building the plane while flying it. There are already things we can do today. We today are relying on information that's gathered from mobile technologies as part of meeting FDA requirements. We have a study now where the data is coming straight from implantable cardiac defibrillators. For MRI conditional defibrillators, we're now looking at what's the impact on, the ability to detect ventricular fibrillation. All that data is just coming from the technology itself. As we move in the future, it's to Adrian's point, people are changing. That the mobile technology isn't just this sort of passive gathering data, it's changing the experience that people have. And now with the example he gave, Apple with the iWatch, and now the ability for people to they are now taking ownership for helping to bring technologies and functions to market, and a complete change in informed consent. You turn on your technology, would you like to try this function? It's investigational, we consent you at the moment, and we gather information on it. Whole brave new world.
Well, so it's been interesting seeing the contrast between my father and my 7 and 9-year-old boys, and they're excited about both the same things. And so they come to me and show me what's the latest thing on an iPad or an application, or something else that is tracking what they do. And so it's quite interesting when you see both your 7-year-old and 78-year-old father wanting a Fitbit or something equivalent for what they do. So it is really coming part of everyday life. And so I think that's the opportunity that we have to seize the day.
And now with MDIC, with the whole work on patient engagement and now real-world evidence on Nest, I mean, it's terrific to start to see some of these work streams that we have the chance to sort of bring them together like a Reese's peanut butter cup. You got your peanut butter, your chocolate, and you get something entirely new.
Well, and that speaks to quality and also what's clinically meaningful, because I think that's the two things. So that we do want to make sure is delivered for these new technologies, what that means.
I think the other caution for CDRH and other regulators is that our entire regulatory system is set up with the idea that we're going to study sick people. And now you're seeing this whole wave of biohacking where healthy people are trying to bring their health to even new higher standards by using a lot of the health technologies that were designed for the sick. So how can we use that data, use that information, use that willingness to participate and learn about how to perfect human performance to even learn more about our devices? But it means a different view of risk than we've had in the past.
Yeah, so maybe government can be disruptive for the medical device industry.
God forbid.
I think we're going to do Q&A. Is my timing right? Yes. So if anyone from the audience would like to ask our panel any questions, please feel free. While you get up to the mic, I'll just say that Adrian and I were involved in sort of one of the first trials, really trying to identify patients, consent them, follow them up using electronic health data. And the first patient in that study consented in their kitchen. And that was probably 2 or 3 years ago. And so whether we can scale these kinds of trials now, I think is really on the table for the future. Yeah,
we definitely want to be going to someone's home or wherever they want, as opposed to just having them always come in to the health system. So if we can go out to them and flip the model, that will be much better.
My name is Jay Newland. I'm Director of Quality for a software design and development shop called Tonic Design in Philadelphia. Most of what we do is apps and websites, so we're often at the leading edge of technology. Conversation, particularly around wearable devices, raises an interesting question in my mind. When the Apple Watch came out and the research kit that went along with it, which allowed researchers to gather a lot of data from a lot of people very quickly. Actually, Stanford University's Health eHeart research showed that an Apple Watch can actually detect atrial fibrillation at 98% accuracy. And Apple is actually talking about the possibility of making recommendations to people, actually warning them when they sense the type of data that indicates possibility of AFib. Are we looking at the possibility that we're going to have to redefine what a medical device is, that all of us are carrying these things on wrists and wallets and places like that actually are becoming medical devices, even though they're not currently determined or controlled as medical devices?
I think you actually touch on actually even a broader issue, is that people are going to have more and more information about their health that they were unaware of. And so, you know, the examples now that you can send off saliva and other tissues to get other information about your health, your genetic background, for instance, environmental exposures, for example. And then as kind of new technologies, say, to pick up heart arrhythmias or conduction abnormalities, there are certain things that, again, like people will start needing to consider what's a framework for returning those results, and do they have any clinical implications that need to be considered as people have more access? And that includes the research environment, where people are going to have greater and greater access to their research results, as well as to the environment where there may be other technologies that they have access to as a consumer. So having said that, like, I think as we go forward, making sure we delineate where we have evidence of what actions are needed or not will be important. And this speaks to the whole goal of having greater real data so we can learn from that to understand, are there positive consequences or unintended negative consequences? And that, you know, it starts driving home the point that we do have to have that framework.
I'm sure Jeff will tell you the details, but I'll do an external kudos. CDRH is really breaking through those barriers, and with their new pilot program, really trying to design an entirely new regulatory paradigm for that breakthrough space. So just an appreciation for that forethought from the industry side.
And you raise a great point, and I'd flip it the other way around. I don't know that we need to, if it's about redefining medical devices, because the law, it's written so broad that just about anything is a medical device. It includes a contrivance. I don't even know what a contrivance is, but evidently we regulate them. But I'd be thinking the other way, which is medical device the right term for the things we're talking about? And maybe we need to just rethink what we're calling all this stuff.
What a wonderful discussion. I'm Danelle Miller, and I'm from Roche. Michelle, thank you for raising the issue of informed consent and HIPAA authorization. To me, it's one of the big elephants in the room. There are millions upon millions of pieces of information out there sitting in electronic health records that very likely are not consented or authorized for use in real-world data. Is NEST going to address that issue?
I certainly hope so. I mean, my nightmare scenario is I have R&D leaders coming to me saying, well, we may have data that patients are willingly contributing and generating that may not be considered good enough for regulators to see, but can really help us design and improve our devices. I mean, how sad is that we have information that we might not be able to even share just because we've forgotten to cross some T or dot some I. And I don't want to be too glib about it, but you know, the patients are willing to participate in this space. So can our payers and regulators get to that same level of openness to participation so that we can share the data as freely as possible?
Gijo James from Johnson & Johnson. First of all, Rachel, the fact that Jeff just moved the goalpost from 24 months to 12 months is probably testament to the great progress you've made in 5 months. So congratulations. Congratulations on that. Great discussion around real-world evidence, and we tackled 2 pieces of it, right? One around the noise and UDI, the second around the lack of linkages. But there's a third part of it in terms of the lack of clinical and functional granularity in existing systems. If you look at EMRs, these were really not built for the med tech industry. They were built mostly for general physicians and as such. Is NEST going to look into trying to influence that part of industry to drive that clinical or functional granularity that would provide us with more meaningful data?
So it is my hope that's where we will go. That is a much broader that's a far more radical change, because it's really thinking about applying industrial engineering to clinical practice. That's what has to happen. You've got to change the workflow in clinical practice so that you truly get to that world where we take clinical practice, we take clinical research, and much of clinical practice, let's be honest, it is clinical research, right? It's just that we don't capture that information systematically to make good use of it. And the only way to do that, we're going to have to change workflow. I mean, actually a very nice case over at Duke with the cath lab. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things is like, how do we actually return value to the clinicians so that people can actually understand that what they are doing will actually have something returned for them later as they are making patient decisions, and then as a community that we can do that. So at Duke, for example, we are really trying to drive that in terms of having things that more standardized in terms of the care that we're doing, in terms of what are the characteristics of the care, as well as the characteristics of the device, as well as the UDI for that, so we can track patient, clinician, the system, and the device along the way, and then ultimately improve the system for the care delivery. But I think just if we were to go forward and just show, so like to say the 100 cardiologists and say, here's the case report form that we want you to fill out every time, then you can imagine the excitement that they would give. But if we were saying like, hey, this is what we're doing to actually help provide better information to you as well as your peers, and then also for ultimately patients to be able to see into what we do, then that is something that we can articulate and people buy into.
Okay. So we have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask our audience to make their questions brief so we can get to everyone at the mics.
Well, quickly, my name is Randall Richler. I'm a senior advisor to Boston Biomedical Associates, an early phase clinical regulatory firm. And I'm very excited of what MDIC has already done in terms of their leadership position in developing studies and this kind of thing, being on the payment side and the reimbursement side, and the fragmentation that we have, considering we have the private payers, we have government, we have consumers who are now making all these decisions. So your task here, the task of MDIC, is to be considered a leader, again, to convince those fragmented purchasers and gatekeepers to use the data that we have to feel comfort in making their decisions on paying for the technology or for the drugs. So I think my question is that how can, this is going to be a hard task for us to maintain, but using MDIC's history now of saying that you're credible, the data's there, we can use the NEST data and transform it and tailor it for all those different stakeholders is going to be essential. So I'm hoping that with this next step that we're able to come to consensus about becoming nimble and this kind of thing using NEST moving forward. So it's not really a question, it's sort of a statement, but this is a great opportunity for us right at this moment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Amen.
My name is John Birch, and I'm up again. I was instructed to ask you a question, so I'll do that. I actually have two questions, and I think your discussion already has addressed many of the issues that I was raising before, but I will put it somewhat more specifically than I did. I really think that we're in a real-world data version 1.0, or we're entering that right now, and that's basically where we're dealing with population-level data. That's what high-tech was designed for, and that's what we've got today, for better or worse. And what I mean by that is it's mostly de-identified, and it comes to us from providers and from claims and from a variety of provider type sources. It does not come to us from patients. Now, patients are starting to, of course, gather their own, but in any event, that's just health. Real-world data 2.0, I think, will be patient-provided data, complete patient longitudinal data. And to illustrate what I'm talking about, and I'll just ask you this question, might NEST do something about this? The most valuable kind of real-world data on a given patient is continuous longitudinal data, where you know what you're missing. Right now, you don't know what you don't know about a given patient. There's no way that you can make that up. We can curate the mistakes, you can curate the errors, the 6-inch tall people and so on that comes from EHR data, but you can't tell whether a patient went to some other place and got a surgery or something that's just not there. So you can't curate that data. That's just missing data, and you don't know whether it's missing or not. Healthcare or real-world data 2.0, I think, will have to address those kinds of issues. That's number one. My question number one is, might you do anything on that now? My quick second question is medical device. How did it ever happen that electronic medical records are not defined as medical devices? I was told that the definition of a medical device is something that provides data that is used for medical decision making. A thermostat, a thermometer, a tongue depressor. These things are medical devices. Why are EHRs not? And the reason that's relevant going forward is if we are indeed moving into a world where there's more and more patient-controlled data, and HIPAA is clearly pushing us in that direction. Patients will be providing data that is going to be used by them and by others for medical decision-making. That's a huge policy question then. It will be a medical device. Shouldn't it be regulated as well? But anyway, so those are two questions.
Thank you, John. I'll say on the longitudinality of patient data, I mean, I think that is a question that many of us have been wrestling with for a number of years. And in our prior work at PCORNet, there's a lot of efforts right now to establish governance between different entities to do data linkages. So you'll hear a lot about data linkages between health systems and payers to really be able to look at that longitudinality of patient data to do the robust epidemiological studies. So I think that is the big problem that we have to deal with on the sort of the data health system side. Patient-owned data is one solution to that, but there are other solutions underway and being explored on that side. And I think it is a reflection of the US system as a whole and how we're set up, which is different from some of the European systems. And maybe I think since we only have 1 minute left, we'll take the last question.
Try to make this very quick. Karen Conway again from GHX and ARM. Dr. Hernandez, I appreciated your comments related to hospitals needing to integrate UDI and the need for a common data system. My question is or how is NEST looking at the need for what I call, perhaps inappropriately, the need for master data management across the entire medical device ecosystem, because we're looking at version control, and even if we're looking at how manufacturers are accurately complying with putting data into the global UDI database, but then we're looking at how hospitals are not necessarily finding it as usable as they need, so we're working on that. And then hospitals report data differently, outcomes differently. Is that an issue that NEST is looking at? And if so, how can we support that need so data from the beginning to the end remains consistent so that we can do quality research?
Well, I think you just highlighted kind of one of the two challenges. One is making sure that there's we take advantage of what's been created and how that gets integrated, and maintaining standards as it goes through the system, so then everyone's using the same information, making the same decisions, and then that does roll up. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned, we do need to make sure that the value case is clearly illustrated. So now that's been, what's been done in terms of creating global UDI, like how do we make sure that gets integrated? But certainly quality and standards will be important for NEST's mission.
Well, thank you to our audience, and thank you to the great panel that I had. So please join me in thanking our...
Thank you all, and it is now time to break for lunch, and we'll reconvene. We've got breakout sessions in the afternoon starting at 1:15.